I'd like to welcome everybody in this lecture theatre and in the overspill next door. Perhaps an indication of the even greater importance of reporting the news in these days of alternative facts and truthiness. And we're delighted that this year's lecturer is Melissa Bell, publisher of Vox Media and co-founder of Vox.com, which sets itself the mission to explain the news. It's a task which, as I indicated, is even more important nowadays and probably more challenging than it's been for a very long time. Vox is one of those new media companies that established media look to in order to try to understand what their own future is likely to be. Prior to Vox Media, Melissa oversaw digital platforms at the Washington Post, one of President Trump's two favored newspapers. She was also one of the Washington Post's most read bloggers and the columnist for the style section. Before joining the Post, she helped to launch Mint, a business paper published in collaboration between the Hindustan Times and the Wall Street Journal in India. She lived in India for a number of years, but she actually comes, lucky Melissa, from California. So she's used to this sort of climate. After the lecture, there'll be a discussion which will be led by Alan Rusbridger, chairman of the Reuters Institute Steering Committee and principal of Lady Margaret Hall, former editor-in-chief of The Guardian, and he'll be chairing a panel which will include Marty Barron, editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, Ritu Kapoor, founder and CEO of The Quint in India, and Tom Standage, a deputy editor of The Economist. So when Melissa finishes, Alan will come up to chair that discussion, and then we'll go to have a drink of something sustaining at 7 o'clock. But I now have great pleasure in calling Melissa Bell to deliver her lecture, which is entitled, perhaps a little provocatively, "We Broke the News, How Do We Fix It?" Melissa.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me here. I have to start by admitting that speaking in public, although I do it quite often, terrifies me. I'm trying very hard to not be nervous, but this is a very intimidating crowd and an intimidating place to be at. So I apologize if I start to speak very fast or stumble over my words. Just sort of wave kindly at me, and I will slow down. Thank you guys so much for having me here. I really do feel so lucky to be at this university and with this institution. When I was 14 years old, I worked for 3 summers to save up money babysitting, and I was allowed to pay for a trip to England and Scotland. And I came to Oxford on that trip and thought to myself that this was the most glorious place that anyone could go to school at. But as was mentioned, I am from California, and at the time I did not realize that you could actually go to school abroad. So I had to make do with an East Coast college that if you sort of squinted in one way, it kind of looked like the Oxford spires. So I have to say that not only am I happy to be here to have this discussion with you all, it's also fulfilling a 14-year-old me dream to participate in the Institutes of Learning here. Thank you. Last year, when we were discussing the possibility of this talk, I knew that I wanted to discuss my frustration with how murky the media waters had become. Little did I know how much more muddied they could become. In the US right now, we have a president who often refers to the media as the opposition party. We have a healthy and growing industry of fake news peddlers across Europe and the US. We have earnest news organizations debating whether or not they can call a lie a lie. And of course, we continue to have a shaky revenue model that is taking heat from all different sides. We are in a very sorry state indeed. And I worry about this industry that we all love and that I hazard to guess we all believe is integral to a functioning and healthy society. So buckle in. I'm going to be a bit of a downer, and I apologize in advance. But the first step in recovery is admitting that we have a problem. And I want to be real about this. I don't think we are very good about admitting that we have a problem. We are very good, however, at blaming others for our problem. We blame the breakneck speed of change, and who can blame us? In the past 10 years alone, we've moved from desktop web to mobile-first social platforms. We've moved from blogging to videos. We've moved from a single new platform, the internet, to AMPs and instant articles and Apple News and VR headsets and Amazon Echoes. It's understandable to be a bit frustrated with that speed of change. We also blame the revenue model. We start with the predecessors that chose to give up our quality content for free. We moved on to blaming advertising agencies slow to adapt to new standards. We worry about the rise of ad blockers, but we don't take a part in saying that we had a place and an opportunity to force better ad technology through. We also blame the attention span of today's audiences. We love to blame technology companies that favor instant gratification and likes and shares over debate and inquiry. We blame those colleagues in Silicon Valley, hi Campbell, for building publishing platforms without consulting us. We blame them for adding noise to the system and subtracting most of our revenue. In the US lately, we've also spent a lot of time blaming an increasingly divided political system, with those who refuse to engage in conversation with the other side, and those who blame both sides for flaming those fires. This isn't to say there are some very real outside forces applying pressure to our business. But when I was young, much younger than when I came to Oxford, I loved building blocks. And I would constantly build these intricate cities on my bedroom floor. And then my little brother would come in, a tiny terrorist, and destroy my beautiful city. And I would wail, and I would cry, and I would moan. And my mother would tell me, build the city on your bed out of his way. So I think that we need to stop and take a hard look at ourselves. We need to admit that we never thought about the metaphorical bed for our industry. We never thought about our strategic advantage. Instead, we blamed whatever brother we could. So since I'm a fan of the listicle, I'd like to start with 9 reasons why we screwed up. The first is we are not to be trusted. In the US, in 1976, after a little paper that I happen to love called The Washington Post revealed some of the mistakes of a past White House, 74% of the US population felt that the media was doing a very good job, that they were fully and fairly reporting the news. Last year, the same survey was sent out, and only 32% of the population felt we were doing our job. When you looked at actual age divisions there, under 49, audiences felt that only 26 of us were doing a very good job. When you divided it on partisan lines, only 14% of Republicans believe that the US media is doing a very good job. And this didn't happen overnight. It's been in decline ever since 1976. Year after year, we've gotten reports on the percentage points melting away. And this is not just an American problem. Edelman recently released a study that showed that people trust Google as a news outlet more than they trust any news organization. The media, of course, is not the only institution to lose trust over the last few decades. People have lost trust in the government, in religion, in banks. But rather than confronting this macro trend, rather than trying to understand what it's all about, we did not start to operate in an environment that confronts cynicism and suspicion, or in a more positive light, what I call curiosity. The second thing that we did is that we ignored revenue for too long. I've got a good and growing company. The Washington Post and the New York Times have suddenly bolstered their subscription model thanks to an unlikely spokesperson in the new US president. But we are a lucky few. There are fewer revenue positive media companies today than not. And I look at the dim prospect, particularly for local news organizations, for niche news organizations, for new startups, and I worry. One reason, though there are likely many more, is because when we were flush with revenue, we built strong church and state divides. We had essentially two different strategies for our organizations, one pursuing a strong revenue model and one pursuing a strong editorial model. We did not think about how those two strategies could sometimes play at odds with each other. I often think about the journalist who covered a man named Craig Newmark and in the business section, constantly reporting on how his new list might change the business model around classifieds. But few, I wonder, walked over to the other side or called out to their editor. There might be something problematic here. I also wonder if folks in the classified systems, in the classified section, were doing a good job reading their business paper and seeing that they were under threat in a real way. We did not spend time thinking about how to bolster up our own advertising models, how to create a better ad technology product. We have not spent enough time worrying about the money. We spent a lot of time worrying about the quality of journalism, the ethics of journalism. We have not spent enough time thinking about the business of journalism. Number 3, we refuse to relinquish the idea of being publishers. I, of course, say this with a very big grain of salt because my title is publisher of Vox Media, so I am partially to blame for this. But I took that title knowing full well that it was a bit of an inaccurate term. On some days at Vox Media, I control less than a quarter of the publishing experience of my audiences. Audiences find my brands on Snapchat, on YouTube, on podcast. The loyalty of the fans has not dimmed, but our meeting point has shifted. We don't have a set date every evening with our audiences to sit down with them for an hour over dinner. We don't show up at their door in the morning as regularly as we used to, and they don't often show up at our own. What we control is what they see and how high the quality of that product is. We need to consider the word programming more often than we think about publishing, and we need to lay claim to the end worth of our product. Number 4, we yearn for a news monopoly. Once we lost control of the medium, we floundered to retain the message. We were lost in a sea of voices, in a din of noise. Instead of realizing our audiences were facing new problems, too much information instead of too little, we continued to offer them a product built for other mediums and other times. But content, accurate or otherwise, scaled up while trustworthy information scaled down. The industry acknowledges there's a real benefit to the democratization of information, but there is all too often a yearning that I hear, often in journalism schools, for the halcyon days when we held a monopoly on what people said and thought. And this brings me to number 5. Number 5, we worshipped objectivity. That monopoly of information left us open to accusations of misleading our audiences. We rallied around the idea of being truth holders instead of truth seekers. And for anyone who potentially is a brown person or anyone who is a woman who is looking at a report largely construed by white men knew often and early that objectivity was a hollow aim. We are not objective. We were never objective. The European publications perhaps have known this a bit longer, but I still see this all too often in the BBC and Reuters reports where they claim that they are objective. And I think that this is a massive, weak spot for us. We use editorial judgment as a code for what we think is important and think you should know. This insistence on objectivity left us wide open for someone in the U.S., like Roger Ailes in the U.S., to stroll in and tell half of the population that he was creating a channel that was fair and balanced, knowing full well that that part of the audience, wink, wink, nudge, 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 would know that we are not fair and balanced in the press. We've ignored the emotional side of news as well. Ailes, is a fascinating, I told you I'm getting nervous, I'm going to take a quick breath. Ailes is a fascinating character to study at this time in the U.S. history. Much like our current president, and his cohorts. He knows the power of both media and politics. He started his career orchestrating town halls for Richard Nixon's second presidential campaign, and he would stock the audience full of people who would applaud at anything Nixon said. He ended his career stocking the airwaves of Fox News with beautiful blondes who had a list of words that were emotionally loaded terms to control our national dialogue. He knew the power of making people feel something, whether it be rage or sorrow or fear. And he knew that that would help him control the message. Emotions all too often trump facts, but we shouldn't run from this. We shouldn't respond by stiffening our lips or straightening our ties. We have to embrace the fact that there is a huge amount of emotion in today's news. People are inundated with information, and they're inundated with terrible moments, frightening moments in the front of their faces every single day. How do we deal with an anxious audience who's forced to see the suffering in 360 degrees splendor every single day? Number 7, we compete over diminishing returns. Publishing has always been an arms race of technology and audience and scoops, but our competition has expanded far beyond other news organizations, and yet we fail to see that threat. Just the other day, a CRO for a large publication mentioned to me casually that he would probably prefer to partner with Apple News on a sales deal than another news organization. He said it sort of offhandedly, but that idea, that underlying remark that he'd prefer to partner with a technology company because it's odd to partner with another news organization is such a strange conundrum that we find ourselves in. Do we feel like we need to help Apple become more successful? And it's not just around revenue. We fight over the same stories, chase after the same storms, leave huge gaps in our coverage. You look at any major story, and if you go to the location, all too often there are more journalists standing on a corner interviewing one person than there are locals on the street. We also battled to create better technology platforms, never coming to a consensus on ad standards or article page performance. We left ourselves wide open to Facebook and Google to march in with their own solutions. Number 8, I promise there's only 9, so we're almost there. We entered into a race for ratings. It's not a coincidence that the trust started to fall in the media in 1976. Only a few years later, what was introduced was the 24-hour news channel. I don't think that it's the internet's fault that started to chip away at the trust in the media. I see it as this need to capture people's attention all day, every day. We shifted journalism toward a race for ratings. And what happens that when you're trying to appeal to the largest audience as often as possible and keep them captivated is very much the Hollywood conundrum. What works are big bang, shoot 'em up films, take another Marvel comic book and put it on the big screen. And we've done that too often with our news programs. We've made our news more entertainment than information, and we've left the door wide open for charming media impersonators to come along. And number 9, we fight too often about ethics in journalism. Every time something new comes along in our industry, we get so lost in conversations about what is and isn't good journalism. We stop paying attention to what's actually happening in the world and also what could possibly benefit us with the new. I think about this often. When I was at the Post, I started a blog that was based largely around aggregation. It was our attempt, the one-woman attempt to figure out what the Huffington Post was doing. There was a ton of debate in the newsroom around whether or not aggregation was a sin. And bloggers using the natural linking system of the web, putting prominent callbacks and credit to other news organizations, actually, in my mind, is an improvement of what we've often done with correspondents who go out and read local newspapers and call up the same sources in that newspaper and re-report the story and think that they've done a job well done. But rather than thinking about what we can learn from the natural ecosystem of the web, the natural styles of the web, we spent too much time worrying and fretting and being concerned that we were losing the line on quality journalism. Okay. Sorry that I was such a drag. I usually like to be optimistic, and I am optimistic. Just because we've made a bit of a mess of things, it doesn't mean that there's not time to fix it. And I really do believe that we are fixing it. I think we finally are focusing on this. We understand the problems, but we need to be more and more concerned every single day because it's serious, it matters, it's necessary. But I look at Vox Media and the amazing work of our 8 brands that we're producing incredible journalism in a new day and age, and we're creating a business model that works. It's not just Vox Media, although I will take credit for our company above all else. No, I'm just kidding. But I do. But I look at publications like local U.S. publications, like the New Tropic in Miami or Texas Tribune in Austin. I look at international publications like the Quint and Pictoline in Mexico. I look at the work coming out of the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Economist, Reuters. I'm thrilled to be in the audience of the type of journalism that is being produced today. But we need to do better, and unfortunately, I don't have all the answers as to how we can. I think that we need to have more discussions like this about what we should and shouldn't be doing as an industry, holistically thinking hard and long about what are the ways that we can right this ship. So here are 6 things that we've been thinking about at Vox Media. And I'd love to hear others when this endless lecture of mine is finished. And I'd love to talk about this after, when we're having drinks in particular. That'll be more fun for me. So the first thing that we think about is that we should be interesting. This seems obvious, but I often think that we ceded emotional, passionate, interesting news to bad actors because we were worried too much about being objective. And I'd argue that we worried about the wrong approach and definition of trust. We can't do that anymore. It is not people's civic duty to read the news. It is our job to make it appealing and interesting and something people want to consume. We cannot go so far as to be entertainment, but we should be entertaining. We think about this with every person that we hire at Vox Media. We think about this with the experience that we're providing. We think about taking complicated, complex, difficult subjects and trying to figure out a way to draw people in. It is our job to draw them in. It is not their job to come to us anymore. The next thing is that I think we must know ourselves better. At Vox Media, each of our brands spends probably an inordinate amount of time thinking about what their purpose, their mission, their unique characteristic is. What is the service that they provide to audiences? What is their unique competitive advantage? What is their metaphorical bed? Vox, the site that I co-founded, explains the news. Those simple words seem as if they can encompass much, but actually it's created a wonderful way for us to think and be specific about each step that we take. It's not we make great YouTube videos. It's not that we help you understand policy and politics. We think about everything we do through the lens of explanation, and it lets our team really be direct in their experiments. How do we explain the news on Snapchat? How do we explain the news with cartoons? How do we explain the news with live events? Whatever new technology or opportunity comes our way, our audience can know Vox and know the mission that it's promising its audience because of that simple statement. The next thing is that we must foster experimentation in our companies. I had the privilege of working at the Washington Post at a time where they put me in a corner and let me do whatever I wanted. And we had a lot of fun. We were allowed to create things. We were given permission to try things, and we were given permission to fail. I've brought this. This was also, it was there to begin with at Vox Media, but this is something that I believe in every day as we build our company and grow. We've scaled in the 3 years that I've been there from a company of 150 people to 800 people. The bigger you get, the harder it is to have those pockets of experimentation, those pockets of surprise and serendipity for somebody who is the next Ezra Klein or the next Kara Swisher to come along and want to be their own entrepreneur in their own within a large corporation. But we think about how do we let people believe that we have an environment where we want to say yes to things. We want to say yes, and we want to not get mad when they fail. We want to tell them it's a lesson, not a failure. And we talk about this every single day with our editors, our product managers, our salespeople. It's a part of our culture that must exist, especially as we grow. The next thing that we think about is that we foster exploration for our audiences. We will never be the only media organization that our audiences come to. That is not the world that we live in anymore. But that actually, I think, provides a huge opportunity for us. We don't have to do everything. We don't have to be everything to all people. We can do something very, very well and deliver something very, very well to our audiences. And we can also be guides for our audiences. My father used to say to me when I was growing up, I don't know why I keep talking about my childhood, but I'm feeling nostalgic, that life was a quest for knowledge. I loved this term. It appeals to all of the little romantic ideas of swashbuckling knights setting off for treasure in my head. And to me, I think the internet really embodies that idea. People set out to seek information online every single day. They are pursuing their own quest for knowledge when they go online. They don't always find it, of course, and that is the challenge that we can help them with. But I think that what we're seeing are audiences who do not want to be told what to think. They want to be deftly guided towards understanding. They want to make their own conclusions. And we want to think about how we can create a product that not only provides them opportunities for exploration of our own work, but explorations and guides for other work as well. As I mentioned, business is a major concern of mine, and I think that one of the things that we need to do and that we think about often at Vox Media is making revenue as important and as good as our editorial and technology products. Without all of those three branches of our organization working and working well, we will not create a product that works for our audiences, nor will we be able to pay for it. Right now, I'm struck by how terrible, how awful, how horrible the advertising experience is online, not just for audiences, but for advertisers as well. If you look at it, there's a rise of ad blockers out there. There's the opportunity now, I think it just came out today, that major corporations are essentially having advertising show up on extremist sites and alongside white supremacy videos on Google, YouTube searches, and you see the fact that we continue to create an experience that people want to shut down and skip over and ban from their site, their line of view, because we did not spend enough time thinking about how we could improve this product. 5 years ago at Vox Media, we were known for an incredible technology platform that was the best editorial experience out there. It was a wonderful writing experience for bloggers and created a wonderful network and distribution model. But we didn't really spend much time thinking about the ad model at all. Over the last 5 years, we've shifted about 75% of our resources on our technology side to thinking about the revenue model. We wanted to build a better ad technology product. We wanted to think about how we could help our users experience our work in a way that was not interruptive, that was not dangerous, that was not fraudulent. This is something that is a huge part of our mission, and it's something that I think we all need to think about more. Next, I would like us to posit that rather than objectivity, we should take another term that is a bit sensational in journalism circles and consider advocacy. Advocacy is a word that people in journalism would say, but I'm not an advocate. I can't be an advocate for any one thing. And I'd like to suggest that we should be advocating for our users, that we should be advocating for our audiences, that we should be advocating for the interests and the needs of the people who come to us and seek information from us. We need to advocate for the best experiences wherever we meet them. We need to advocate for trustworthy information. We need to advocate to technology platforms for a better user experience, a more safe user experience on those platforms. We need to advocate for actual facts. We need to advocate for advertising that does not hurt the experience. And we need to advocate for the people who want to understand the world around them. And last but not least, I think that we need to strive for decency. Not just in our work, but in our humanity. It is difficult to be a media organization in 2017 in a digital media landscape. It is also difficult to be a decent human being on the internet in 2017. The social networks we all frequent reward glib jokes and schoolyard viciousness. The US president models a politics of pettiness. He has an intent to drive his opponents into a constant state of outraged distraction. We are stretched thin as an industry. We are anxious and on a razor's edge. We have major threats to our business. And the work we are called to do can be emotionally and physically draining. But we must have passion and a clear eye for both our challenges and our opportunities. We must not push ourselves into a blind frustration or fret endlessly. We must carefully earn every day the respect of our audiences and be unrelenting in offering them important, unsparing work. To do that, I believe that we must be good people first, that we must believe in the mission of what we try to do every single day when we come to work, and then we can be great journalists. Thank you so much for having me.
Alan and colleagues are going to come up.
Do I sit up here?
Yeah.
And thank you for being so nice to me.
Matthew's notes. Your speech. Matthew's notes.
Drinks, anyone?
I'll take one.
You need one.
Thank you.
Gin's in there.
Thank you. Thank God.
Well, thank you, Melissa. That was fabulous. You've covered an awful lot of ground. I lost count at one point. I got 9 bad things.
And 7 good things.
Seven. I didn't lose count. I got them all. Yeah.
I'm hoping that we can come up with 2 more today, right now.
She was still writing about sort of 2 minutes before we all came in. So if we'd let her catch the taxi over instead of walking over, you'd have got it up to 9, wouldn't it? It'd been balancing list. Well, look, Ed, we've got Marty Barron there, who doesn't need much introduction. We were walking over, and I said that I thought Marty was one of the 2 most important Americans alive today. And in a weary way, he said, yes, people keep telling me that. Absolutely no pressure at all. We've got Tom Standage, who is Deputy Editor of The Economist, and for years since you wrote for The Guardian once upon a time, didn't you?
20 years ago.
Wrote about one of the most interesting writers about technology and all the stuff that we're talking about today. And then there's Rita Kapoor here. Tell us about the Quint, Rita, because people know about the Washington Post, and some people know about the Quint, but tell us about the Quint.
The Quint is India's experimental mobile-first, video-first news and content site. It's targeted at young audiences of 18 to 35. A big opportunity waiting for us because this was the audience that had stopped reading or watching news or engaging with it. And we will soon turn 2, and it's been fun.
Well, it's a fabulous panel, and we've just come from a fabulous board meeting of the Reuters Institute, because there are some pretty brilliant and clever people in the audience as well. So we've got to stop in about an hour's time. So I thought what we would do is to sort of discuss it amongst ourselves. But if the brilliant people in the audience could think of brilliant questions and points of view as well, we'll come to you in time. Marty, I mean, a lot of what Melissa was saying must have been thoughts that had occurred to you over the last few years. Give us your initial response. What most stood out from her 9 sins and her 7.
Before Marty answers this, I have to just give a little bit of context for this. Marty was my editor for a very short time at the Post, as the last few months that I was there. And I came in and I had a draft for this speech that was not finished that I sent out to them yesterday. And I looked over and Marty had editing notes on my speech. And I just love, he's such an immaculate editor that he's still editing my speech.
No wonder you were nervous.
So, okay, sorry.
Be gentle.
I will
Yeah.
be gentle, actually. I had sort of advised Melissa that she should not leave the Washington Post, that it would be a big mistake. And you could see how bright she was, because it was,
Never heard of
she
it
did
again.
not take my advice. So it all worked out well. You know, I mean, I guess as I was listening to that, I was thinking, well, I was there during all those years. I must have been the one who committed all those sins. And, you know, I mean, I think it's easier, it's obviously easier when you're looking back on that period to be able to diagnose what was going on. If you're in the middle of the storm, sometimes it's hard to sort of figure out all the cross currents and how you should deal with that. I think there was, you know, I mean, obviously we made a lot of mistakes. I'm not sure that if we had done any one thing, things would have turned out all that differently, to be honest with you. There were a lot of efforts to deal with the internet. I mean, I was remembering how, you know, I was at Knight Ridder for a long time, which owned the Miami Herald, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the San Jose paper, a large variety of papers. And it was back in 1994, there was a guy, Roger Fidler, who came out with the first tablet. It was too soon. It wasn't the time to come out with a tablet. There was a thing called videotex in the late 1970s. I remember I was a business reporter at the Miami Herald, and I wrote about what Knight Ridder was doing with that. And then they came out, and there was something called Viewtron, which was modeled on, I think it's modeled on some British system called Prestel. Way back when. The Knight Ridder lost $50 million in that project, and it was sort of a precursor to how people might use the internet. I remember being at the New York Times, when I worked at the New York Times and participating in strategy sessions, and there was all the talk at the time was about how portals were everything, and how maybe the New York Times needed to buy a portal. And then the calculation was that buying a portal might have cost like $1 billion. Thank God they didn't buy a portal. There wouldn't be a New York Times today. And when I was at the Boston Globe, there was a lot of talk about search was obviously the future. And we at the Boston, and there was an effort there under the aegis of the New York Times, which owned the Boston Globe, to sort of say, okay, Google can do search at a national level really well. Maybe we can do search at a local level better than Google can do it. And so there was an effort to do that. Well, the answer was we couldn't. And we wasted a lot of money on that. So there were a lot of efforts. I mean, not all that we should do. Certainly with regard to, you know, classified advertising, people were aware of what Craig Newmark was doing. There were a lot of people saying, why aren't we doing this? And obviously, in classic fashion, the industry was worried about doing that, going full bore, because they were worried about undermining their pre-existing business model. Which is the classic story of disruption, right? So I think it's we made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I agree with the basic diagnosis. I'm not sure I would use the word blame, but that's sort of what we went through. I think there were serious efforts. I agreed with all of Melissa's prescriptions for what we ought to be doing. I thought they were all good. She added, I mean, from the time that I saw the draft to the time that it came, she had added 3. So that was good. I agree. She should just keep going. And I think that, look, we're in a time where the industry is just changing dramatically. I think I always say that what we're talking about here is a new medium. It's not the same medium. All right. So we had print, then we had radio. It's different. The way you communicate on radio is different than the way you communicate in print. Then we had television. The way you communicate on television is different from the way that you communicate on radio and the way you communicate in print. And along came the web, and what did we do? We just put up print stories. And then that didn't work. And then we said, well, okay, let's put them up faster. And we put them up faster, and that didn't really work. And what we're talking about now is just a different way of communicating. I think it's much more conversational, it's much more accessible. We use all these tools to tell stories that are video and audio and original documents and annotations of documents and social media and things like that. And we have to just recognize that what we have today is a different medium, and we have to change what we do. We can still deal with serious subjects. We do deal with serious subjects. We do have to make them interesting. People do not feel, I think they kind of have an obligation, but they don't feel they have an obligation. Whether I think they have an obligation, it doesn't really matter to them. They don't feel they have an obligation to go searching for news. So we have an obligation to make it interesting enough that they will actually read the news. And that's the burden is on us. And we have to accept that burden.
What did you feel about point number 6 in the
Advocacy?
In the,
Is that advocacy?
well, there was point number
I should have thought about
5
these
in the
points a little
sins and
bit
point number 6. So
What was point number six?
it was forget about objectivity and go for advocacy. And
Well, Melissa changed her definition of advocacy between versions, I could tell. But I'm always in favor of being an advocate
I'm gonna change it again.
for the reader.
Couple minutes.
But I mean, look, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of journalism, okay? I accept that. There's always been advocacy journalism. There have always been publications that have advocated, been on the right, been on the left, that's
And in the middle.
and occasionally in the middle. And so I think that that's always existed. I don't think we all have to do the same thing. In fact, we are not all the same thing, and that there's a great variety in this ecosystem, the media ecosystem, which is what makes it so fascinating. We should all find our place in that ecosystem. You know, the Washington Post is not going to be what Vox is, and Vox is not going to be what the Washington Post is, because why should the Vox
but do you
be
think
what
the Washington Post should be objective?
I think we should be, that's not the word that I would use.
What word do you use?
We should be independent, we should be fair, we should be honest, we should be honorable, all right? And then we should do our work, do our research, and whatever we find, if we've done it all properly, we should tell people what we found in a straightforward, direct, unvarnished manner, unflinching manner, and that's what we ought to do. And whatever the facts tell us, or the story is, I mean, the obligation is for us to do the work properly and thoroughly, and then to tell people what we found, and not to hesitate to do that.
Essentially, what she's doing in the Vox is what The Economist does. It explains,
Yes,
doesn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think explaining the world is so in many ways I relate to what Vox is doing. I particularly relate to the conundrum that Melissa finds herself in now, because I have not just one but two editors-in-chief in the room who I previously worked for, Alan and Bill Emmett over here, who used to be my editor at The Economist. So I agree with a lot of your prescriptions, but I would also say that they don't all apply to all news organisations. We do have this variety, and advocacy is something The Economist has always been known for. And going back to your question about objectivity, this whole objectivity obsession was a sort of thing that happens, particularly in America, when the media was professionalised in the 20s, and it came out of, in part, the advent of local news monopolies, where you didn't want to annoy half of your readers, and you had this kind of regional-based competition. And in Europe, where you tend to have smaller countries and national competition between newspapers, we do have much more of a tradition of partisan newspapers. So there's that aspect of the kind of where you come out on objectivity. But I think another one where we've taken a different position at The Economist since the beginning, but has ended up being kind of a very good position to be in now, is we're very straightforward about when we are advocates for things. We were founded to be advocates for free trade. But we've been advocates for lots of liberal causes, and the straightforward thing is we say what our biases are. And what irritates me about Fox News, and what I have to say started to irritate me about the New York Times, is it's not that they take positions on things, it's that they don't do so in a kind of honest. I mean, Fox News is the worst of all, because it says it's.
He's saying Fox with an F.
But it says it's fair and balanced, and they're not admitting what their biases are. In the Economist, we bang on about we're in favour of free trade, or we're in favour of we supported Obamacare, or we supported gay marriage very early on under Bill, and he got the biggest post bag in the history of The Economist when we put that on the cover. But we're in our editorials, we'll straightforwardly say, as a liberal newspaper, we believe this, we believe that. And we do have a cohort of our readership who can't stand the positions we take on things, but like our reporting, or particularly this sort of NGO reading, NGO economist readers who disagree with our politics, but they do like our in-depth reporting. So I think this kind of where we end up is you can, if you're open about your biases, and this was something that the tech press have led. Kara Thrisher did this. The whole idea that you have to have a sort of biography, so that when I'm reading a review by a tech journalist and they're reviewing the new MacBook, I want to know if they're a Mac user or not, because it affects how I, and they've really taken that to an extreme in what they've done. So I think objectivity, we need a different definition of it, and I think sort of transparency and openness. Transparency is the new objectivity, as some people put it. Is a really good way to come at that, because then you're kind of open about what your position is, and you put the facts in front of people and say, this is what we think.
Okay, so I have a seventh now. A seventh point. Both of you are saying show your work. I think that that's something that like I've heard from both of you, and I think that that's a seventh thing that we should be
I
doing.
thought that was 8.
That's 8.
Yeah.
That's 8.
I
I was counting. It's 8.
She's lost count.
About 8.
Okay. So up this end of the table, we're all kind of dinosaurs, struggling to,
Excuse me.
with that sort of dreadful phrase, with sort of legacy media. You've started something completely new. I mean, I know you had a sort of previous life in
Yeah,
CNN
I had
television,
I had a wonderful advantage of hindsight as far as legacy media was concerned. So I knew what not to do and what to unlearn. And I won't dwell on that. Completely agree with all 9 sins. And so rather than stay with what's wrong, because I think that's out there, that there's a lot that needs to be fixed. I think I'll just a little deeper into in my new avatar that I've understood, which digital media allows you to do, which legacy media did not allow me to do. This is the closest I have been to my readers / viewers / users. I have never been this close, which has taught us a few things. One is that we are reaching out at the Quint. We're reaching out to a very young TG, and we're reaching out to a TG which is perceived to not be interested, the millennials, not perceived to not be interested in news and politics. And we started with that perception since we came from legacy media. And we were surprised to see that this audience engages hugely with issues. And we realized that 2 or 3 things that we realized that we should not do, which is one of the times that you make a mistake is when you try to put out news quickly. And the news that you're trying to put out quickly is often commodity news or air. Everyone has it. It's there on Google, it's there on Facebook. So that was one of our learnings, which is don't try and do that. Try and look at news, try and explaining the news or give perspective or create engagement and start conversation on the news. So on the Quint, we explain, but we also start conversations. Since it's on the mobile, it's a 2-way communication, and do the social listening. While we love to question platforms like Facebook, but it's been great for us to actually sit back. Now, for instance, to the objectivity point, we realized that we've got to take a stand and we've got to put the stand out there. And for instance, we were very strongly against the way Prime Minister Modi had gone about implementing his demonetization plan and how completely unthought through it was. And we found that a lot of young Indians who believed in Modi were very, very angry with us. And they were writing in a lot to us saying, you guys are just haters. You just hate anything that Modi does. And we realized, and we took cue, we listened to that. We listened to all the commenting that was happening. And we found cues there for what we need to step out and explain. What we need to further say rather than just, speak at 35,000 feet height on, why economically that policy is misplaced. We actually got down to talking about it. That's one. The other realization that I've had is that you've got to actually make it relatable. You have to make this young. You have to talk. The vocabulary in which you put out the news has to be the vocabulary that this young audience is speaking in, and therefore they will engage much more. But to also make it fun, we actually use memes and GIFs and fun stand-up videos, etc. Converting stand-up comic formats into news formats, because actually that leads to much more engagement and engaging and conversing with serious news issues. For instance, when Trump happened, one of the things that we did, we actually took Trump's the video of Trump. And we put, when Trump happened. Modi happened and then Trump happened. We actually put Modi's speeches over the visuals of Trump's inaugural speech. And then we actually did serious editorial content around that. But that drew the audiences and then started the conversation again on some of the things that we wanted the readers to look at as far as Modi's policies are concerned.
Tell me about the conversations with the audience, because I think a lot of people felt that digital media were going to allow people to get closer to their audience. And then I think when they got near the audience, they thought, we don't like them very much. And the number of publishers are now closing down comment threads and saying, actually, we don't want to have those conversations because they're all morons. And so how come you have all these brilliant conversations, whereas I bet Marty's reporters are sort of thinking, I don't want to read the comments underneath my articles.
Well, there morons are there. The morons are there. There's no escaping the morons. And there's a lot of we do a lot of Facebook Lives, and we get a lot of you're discussing something really serious, and you get a lot of, hi, you're looking pretty. You get a lot of that nonsense, but you also get I think maybe it's got to do with India and the young demographic.
Just nicer people.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And I think there's a hunger for literacy. I think there's hunger for information. I think there's a huge parts of India which are just beginning to engage with this, which is why regional news media, the newspapers are growing as well, even as digital media is growing. I think that's why. I think there's deeper engagement, perhaps less cynicism yet. Of course, there is the morons, there is the cynicism, there is the inane conversations as well. But we get a lot of people writing for us, blogging for us. So we've actually had to open up a separate section. And this is not something that we were calling out for, it just started pouring in. It started with when the government started cracking down on protests by students saying this is sedition and trying to put them behind jail. And behind bars, and that's when we found that a lot of young students wanted to write into us, and we started putting it out, saying this is a reader's point of view, sort of with a disclaimer, and that led to further engagement and more news. The other thing that I find has helped us better our content or better our news is actually have much more the right kind of representation in the newsroom. Apart from the fact that we have a very young newsroom, we have reporters, desk writers from various parts of the country, from various demographics. And I think that helps us correct, because very often a lot of armchair writing is corrected from within the newsroom, because somebody stands up and says, hey, that's not, I am from that part of the state, and that's not how it is. Or I know someone who can give you a report which is far more accurate from the ground. Because digital newsrooms don't have the kind of boots on the ground that legacy media does, and that is sometimes the disadvantage of digital startups. And I think that has helped. I think the fact that when we started the Hindi version of the Quint, we got another bunch of reporters in who belong to another demographic and to another way of thinking and to another geographical part of the country. And I think that brought in a certain kind of stronger editorial as well. So I think that is important, has been important for us.
Going back to Marty, I've been thinking about you a lot since November, because I genuinely think, you're what stands, you and Dean Baquet at the moment, what stands between us and something not very nice. But
People keep telling me that.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough tonight. But part of you, you did a fabulous job of reporting Trump. You put huge amounts of resources into it. You did as good reporting as anybody could do. And if Hillary Rodham Clinton had won, everyone would have, you'd have picked up another Pulitzer, and everyone would have said that was fabulous, and that was what journalism was for. But Trump won in the end, and the audience seemed not to care about all the stuff that you wrote. And I just wonder what that makes you feel about journalism, and whether even if you adopted all Melissa's 8, or she may have a 9th one by now, whether actually something has changed and the audience don't seem to care for the things that we all used to care about.
Sure. Well, one of the reporters who worked so hard on the campaign was David Farenthold, who kind of became a hero because of his work on Trump's charitable foundation, which really was giving away other people's money rather than his money. And he wasn't giving virtually anything out of his own pocket. And David tells a story about how he was interviewed at one point by a German journalist in the middle of the campaign saying, do you think that this is the absolute high point of your life? And then after the campaign, another German journalist came and interviewed him and said, do you feel as if your entire career has been wasted? So that's how things changed.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I think it's a reach to say that it didn't matter. I think it did matter. I think that people know what our job is, to tell people what they need and deserve to know about the people who are running for public office. Ultimately, it's up to the voters to make a decision, and they take into account a lot of different factors, not just what our stories were over the course of the campaign. And there were a lot of factors to consider. First of all, Obama had been in office for 8 years. Voters do tend to want to change. You had a particular candidate who was not the strongest candidate in Hillary Clinton. There was a joke in Washington that he's the only candidate she can beat, and she's the only candidate he can beat. And it was. She was not the strongest candidate, and there were a whole host of issues that she had to contend with as well. And there is this anxiety in America, concern about, particularly among white working class in the middle of the country, and who feel that they're not getting ahead, that they're losing jobs, that those jobs aren't coming back, they don't see opportunities for their kids. They feel that the culture is changing in a way that makes them deeply uncomfortable. And those are factors as well, so it's not just on journalism. But, Trump went into office with the lowest approval rating of any president since people have been polling on such matters. And no doubt, a lot of that is a reflection of what people know about Donald Trump. And what they know about him is what the press has written about him. And I think that it would be wrong to sort of say that journalism had no impact, that people didn't care. They had a lot of things to consider. And what we wrote about, those were some of the things, but they weren't everything that they had to consider.
Tom, as an observer of news organizations, you might believe in all Melissa's list of 8 or 9 or 10, whatever it is now, but it's incredibly hard to turn the ocean line around, isn't it? And some of these things, for instance, we've all been saying for years in newsrooms we must do less. But it's very hard to persuade editors and news editors
absolutely.
to do less, because they have a kind of sort of professional.
There's always
instinct.
a shiny new thing. I mean, it was great to hear about some of the shiny new things that from the 70s and 80s that turned out not to be the shiny new thing. But one of the things I've been doing in the last 6 months is putting The Economist on Snapchat, which is sort of the most unlikely platform I could think of to put The Economist on. And I said so in an interview. And so the CEO of Snapchat came to the office and said, no, I think you'd be great. Come on to Discover. So that's been very interesting, because that's about sort of figuring out what the essence of the Economist DNA is, and then reinterpreting it completely for another platform. Very much what you were saying about sort of meeting people where they are, but still sort of maintaining your journalistic integrity and not dumbing down and still doing the same things. But I think the difficulty is that the oldest news organisations and the healthiest news organisations that are still around are the ones that have the strongest church-state divide, I think. And we always had a very strong church-state divide at The Economist, and we still do. But it goes from being an asset to being a liability in this environment, because the business and the technology and the editorial teams all have to work together. And the stronger you make that wall, the harder it is to change the culture, to encourage people to do that. And I think that's a real problem, because it means that and the New York Times has grappled with this, quite publicly. And the great thing about the startups is that, they start from day one with a kind of understanding that they do have to think about the business model, and they do have to think about the technology, and they do have to think about the editorial model as an integrated whole. And it's very hard for our old news organisations to sort of embrace that startup thinking. And I find myself a lot of the time saying, if I was a startup that had access to the content, the Economist content, and the Economist network of journalists, what would I be doing? And that's very often the starting point for a new product. So it's that sort of what would a startup do in this situation is something we have to ask ourselves. But yeah, it is very, very difficult to, people talk about rebuilding the 747 while it's in flight, and that's essentially the problem we face.
So for the benefit of the legacy media here, looking at the 2 new players, I mean, this idea of going where the audience is was again something I guess we've all grappled with, and that ends up with us being on Facebook, and we have a very important person from Facebook here, and a lot of legacy media are saying, well, that was great, we tried that. And what we've done is to give Facebook lots of brilliant content. And look what, they're walking off with all the advertising. So how does it work for you? I mean, I love being on Facebook too, but it's not working for
I think that not even just to talk about Facebook in particular, but I think that overall in general, I want to actually go back to something that Marty said in the beginning, that I didn't mean to put blame on you alone.
Me alone.
Mainly him,
but I actually would say that I think the Washington Post and the New York Times did brilliant coverage over the last election. But we are not through the storm. Like, we are still in a place where there were mistakes that were made. We did an excellent job. I mean, hands down, the coverage I think the Washington Post did was some of the most brilliant over the last season. But we are still in a very fraught environment, and we are still making the same mistakes. The reason why I enumerated them today was because I still think we're making the same mistakes. And if we don't think about it, we are going to repeat history. Because Marty said that we are in a space where this is a new medium, and we've entered a new medium. And I'd actually like to argue that we are not in a new medium, we are in new mediums. We are in we can be a website, we can be a podcast, we can be a Facebook instant article, we can be a Facebook video, we can be a Facebook live video, we can be Amazon Echo, there's so many permutations that we can be. There's so many shiny new objects that we can be. And I think that when you think about where do you go to where the audiences are, the audiences are everywhere. I mean, the challenge with us is not that there's no limit to curious people who want information right now. And so I think that, like, what we need to do is be smart about the choices that we're making, be really thoughtful about what the opportunities are. If Facebook is not providing a revenue model, we need to sit down with Facebook and have some long, deep, dark talks about how we figure out a monetization model for our businesses.
Do you want to have that conversation here?
And
Anything
we are
Right.
having that conversation. But I mean, I think that's the thing, is that you see platform companies like Facebook, like Google, engaging in those conversations because of the fact that they're recognizing that quality content and quality information matters. That there is they're recognizing it just as much as we are kind of shouting from the other side, that there is a need for this kind of this work out there, but we have not yet figured out the way to deliver it in the best possible package that includes the revenue model, includes the right technology, and includes the right editorial. You're creating a Snapchat channel for The Economist, and that requires graphic artists and designers. And The Economist has always had some great magazine covers, but you are mostly a very dense text magazine. So how do you then create the expertise around something like visual short images, and then do that for the other 17 mediums that you could potentially put The Economist in?
Why are you doing that?
Why indeed? Actually, we have a great heritage of covers with our humorous graphic. Basically, our Monty Python sense of humour on the covers translates really nicely to Snapchat. This week's cover is a classic. If you haven't seen it, it's Trump with lipstick on, and right next to Putin, he's got a big kind of lipstick mark on his cheek, and it's talking about the grand bargain, a potential grand bargain between America and Russia. But no, I think
it's marketing. Is that what it is?
At this point, it is. But actually, it pays for itself. So we make enough on the advertising to cover the team of we have to have designers and all the rest of it. So. But the main thing is that it's allowed us to reach millions of new readers who are predominantly under 24 and who are much more female than our existing audience. And the weird thing is we do a Snapchat edition on the threat from North Korea, or how China censors the internet, or populism. This week's issue is on populism, and this is really, it's not kind of Kardashians, and it's not fluffy bunnies.
But the people on Snapchat,
it's hardcore economists.
The Snapchat users are not going to take out subscriptions.
We're not expecting them to go straight to subscribe. If you look at that demographic, an awful lot of, I've been looking at the research, an awful lot of people in that age group essentially rely on media that their parents are paying for. So that's they use their parents' subscriptions for things. And my wife grew up having her father bring The Economist back when she was a teenager and opening the science pages and putting it on her desk on Friday evening because she was a science student and a medical student. So there is that kind of potentially one of the avenues we're looking at is how do we ask those readers to basically get their parents to give them gift subscriptions. That's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing we can do. But I think going back to the broader point, you can't fight all these battles, and you can't go onto all of these platforms, and you have to pick the ones where it makes sense, and you have to have a very clear idea of what your editorial DNA is. And you have at Vox, it's very, very clear. Explain the news. We know what that means. I think we have the same answer at The Economist. And when you know what the answer to that question is, you can go to a new medium and say, whether it's video or podcasts or bots or whatever, and say, what does the expression of those values look like? And if you can't come up with a distinctive answer, then you probably shouldn't be on that platform.
Okay, there are lots of brilliant people in the audience. We know that. And here's a great brilliant person.
Let's hear from the first one.
Not in relevance to the brilliance.
Have you got a question, or are
Yes,
you
I have
just
a
brilliant?
question.
Yes.
No, I have a question.
You're brilliant and you have a question.
We've been
Yeah.
talking. Oh, okay, great.
Mike on its way.
First
So I find it interesting in this conversation. We've now been generally including your remarks, which were wonderful, Melissa, and this discussion. There's a huge gap in this conversation that I want to get the opinion of the panelists on, which is, you speak about Marty and Dean Baquet as being the two most important people in America, but I think there's a third member of the Holy Trinity when speaking about media in general. In this case, that would be Jeff Zucker. I mean, there's been no mention of the impact of television, which I think has been in this news cycle, particularly in Trump, around in any news cycle, is enormous. And so, it seems absent from the conversation. I think the influence is so profound. I'd love to know in the context of and has a business model that at least for now, is still pretty not bad. So I'd love.
You used the word CNN?
Sorry, yeah, we were.
Well, television in general. Right?
Yeah. Television.
Well,
It's missing for our conversation so far.
Okay, well, before I get into that,
Right, okay.
Within America, there was a lot of interest in what was happening in America everywhere else as it was in India. But we didn't have as much interest or access to television content through the presidential elections. But what we had access to was the internet and all the content that was going out on the internet. So while the business models are yet to sort out, I think the way the internet travels, television is not traveling as much. In my earlier avatar, my husband and I had co-founded Network 18, which is a large network of 35 TV channels. And we found that one of the problems that broadcast television had got into, at least in India, which is that everybody was doing the same thing. Everyone was looking over their shoulders, and there was very little reportage happening, a lot of talking happening. There was a lot of opinion, and there was inadvertently providing a lot of platform to people to come and speak about their agendas, which I think was, I think there was a lot of boredom and a lot of going away from watching news as a consequence of that in India. I don't watch American news channels as closely, but I think that's where I think digital brings in some of the values of print, which is it goes more intensive. It's deeper, which I don't know what American news television is doing. Is there a lot of investigation? Or is there a lot?
You presumably were watching.
I mean, I definitely, section 2.6 of my various points. There was, I believe that 24-hour news channels were the start of the problems that we really see, where it's mass information flooding out context analysis, understanding, and I think that to your point there, the internet can travel much wider, but television has a very real impact. We actually had a conversation recently about not just the fact that television has an impact in terms of really influencing in the U.S. voters, but a lot of what television anchors take from are the conversations from the internet. So there's this very through way where the television amplifies some of the more unsavory parts of the web. I think that they build on each other. They amplify anger. They amplify entertainment. They amplify division. And I think that I really do think that a major problem is the television networks that we face. When I left the Post, I thought that I could help solve some of the problems by making a better technology product. And I think that one of the biggest lessons that we've learned is that the impact that we really could have is around video and a better visual offering in that space. Because right now, I think the television noise is often what distracts from a very strong culture of debate and inquiry. So you're totally right to talk about that. And I don't think that it's just Jeffrey Zucker. I think that it's very much Fox News. I think that it's other television news organizations as well.
Tim Gardam, then John Lloyd. Tim first.
I think the television point there is a very specifically American point, because American television has a very different culture to European television. The point I want to ask, though, was this. Going back to Melissa's first beginning of her excellent lecture, where she pointed to the collapse of trust in journalism since '76. And we then, on the panel, have a really good account of how new entrants into journalism are building a new idiom of journalism for a younger demographic which is not engaged with news and learning from the mistakes of the past. But that collapse of trust, particularly in Western countries where the demographics are aging, is not with the demographics who are using the new journalism. It's with the demographics which have been going on the journey of the pressures on traditional journalism. I'd just like to hear from the panel about what do they think has been the, looking back in hindsight and the lessons for the present, of this problem of trust in journalism from an audience which has been very familiar with the past and has been going with you through the transition.
Who wants to take that one?
He does.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that's happened, obviously, as Melissa pointed out, there's been a loss of trust in institutions generally, so it's not just us. You know, we're down there with the estate agents and the second-hand car salesmen now, but so are the politicians, and and so are the bankers, and so that's part of it. I think another part of it is that the proliferation of news sources has revealed that previously, when you only had 2 news channels to watch and 3 newspapers to choose from, you didn't have the range of alternative facts that are now available to you, and the ability to, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, because this is people say this is a golden age of news because you have access to more sources than ever before, which is fantastic from a consumer's point of view. And there is Google News was set up by an Indian Googler who wanted basically a better choice of news than he'd grown up with to be more widely available. So that's a good thing, but I think that also makes people realise that what they had previously taken as an authoritative voice was just one of many voices. And so what that means is we need to have a greater degree of news literacy, and you see this, I think, with, if I look at my children, they are growing up in a world where they're surrounded by crazy stuff on YouTube and all the rest of it, and they are much more inclined to question, and what they have to learn to do is they have to figure out what's reliable and what's not. People say you shouldn't allow children to use Wikipedia as a source at school, but the absolute opposite is true. Wikipedia is brilliant because it makes people go and say, well, hang on, how do I know this thing on Wikipedia is, why should I believe it? What are the sources? And that's the sort of media literacy that we need more of. So I think what the proliferation of news sources did was reveal the fact that we didn't have maybe the degree of media literacy that we need. And boy, do we need it now. So I think that's where we need to focus. And that's the sort of thing that Facebook is interested in doing. I mean, these sort of tagging questionable fake news stories and making people question it. My aunt in Trinidad posted a crazy fake news story a couple of days ago about a 5-metre tall skeleton being found in Australia. Does this mean that Australia used to be a land of giants? Actually, the picture comes from a Guardian story of a woolly mammoth being found in Europe a few years ago. And so previously, I would have just let this slide. I mean, my crazy aunt in Trinidad wants to post crazy stuff, then fair enough. But I just thought, no. If we're not going to say no to the 5-metre tall people in Australia, then that's just the beginning of the end. So I found the hoaxes debunked site that posted it, that debunked this and showed that the picture had been taken from the Guardian story about mammoths, and put it, and I probably wouldn't have done that 6 months ago. I'd have just said it's a stupid story about skeletons. But actually, I think calling out people sharing stuff that's bullshit, whether it's about Donald Trump or mammoths, is something we need more of.
One small step for truth. What's that?
One of the things Wikipedia does is actually rather rigorous about footnoting stuff, isn't it? Because it knows that it has to earn truth, which is sort of...
And they've just stopped using the Daily Mail this week. They've
Yeah.
said the Daily Mail is no longer allowed to be a footnotable source.
They were late to that one, weren't they? But,
well done.
but they've borrowed that from academia, and I wonder, Marty, you must have discussions within your newsroom about how you establish the truth of things, and how you have to show you're working. And I know it's very hard to get journalists to include links, but links is one thing that helps.
Well, we should. We should have more links. We should have. I mean, look, there's Google. We have a representative from Google here, and you know they have a project called Trust Project, which I've been sucked into, and you know, one of the principles there, they haven't come to any real conclusions yet, is to do more showing of our work, more original documents. What were our sources? Who did we talk to? Who is the person who's writing this? What is that person's background? Those kinds of things, and I think a lot of that is meritorious.
Do you think we're going to end up putting the full audio of interviews and things like that in a footnote so that...
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be great if we can. If we can, I
do
think it would. I don't know that it has to be a full thing, because actually having too much can be an impediment to people actually accessing it. But finding the key portions would be a great idea. Putting up more original documents, annotating those documents, you know, those kinds of things. Look, in much of the new way of telling stories, we're incorporating tweets and other social media, and it shows that, let's say somebody on a scene, what they actually saw. Here is the tweet that they had. We don't have to summarize it. We can show what people actually said. We are now in a position where we no longer just have to. We can go beyond just telling. We can actually show. And so here we have the power to show. Why shouldn't we then take advantage of that opportunity?
Yeah, it's the Jeff Jarvis, do what you do best, link to the rest, which he said about 10 years ago, but it took a long time to catch on. John Lloyd, microphone there.
I don't know if this is a very important point or quite a trivial one, but I was surprised by the shyness of Ritu and Tom and Marty about objectivity. And it struck me that the words you were using, transparency, honesty, getting to the facts, showing, and so on, what else is that about but some kind of attempt at objectivity? And any news story, which is not opinion, which is not advocacy, or an analysis, is striving after something called objectivity.
Yes,
The reporter or the editor can't be objective, but the process can, and the end is. So why are you so shy of objectivity? And it speaks to something which I thought was the most radical thing that Melissa said, which I thought was terrible, but I may be wrong. And that was really in passing. And you said that one of the deadly sins was that, in the past, was that white male journalists wrote journalism, which meant very little or nothing to women and African Americans. And it just struck me, is that true? I mean, does Dean Baquet edit the New York Times in a different way from Bill Keller because he's black? Do you really?
Yes.
Do you think so?
Yes.
Well, you'd have to define how is that different. And are you publisher of Vox in a different way from a man? Being so?
Yes,
Yes.
I think this is not a trivial point at all, and I'm very pleased that you asked about it. I think that it is, I think to go back to your original question around the objectivity part of it, I think that the way that Marty described it to me was an excellent description. I think that we should, and the way that you just said it, strive for objectivity that is a wonderful aim. We should strive to collect the truth as much as we possibly can. But the fact of the matter is, we are doing our best estimate of collecting facts and putting together our construction of what a story is. And there is no way that you can bring a background from whatever background it is. The easiest is to say race and gender, but you come from a geographical location, you come from an educational background, you come from a economic background, and you bring all of that with you when you come to report on a story. So the choices that I make as a reporter are very different from the choices that the rest of the panelists probably make because of all of that collection of our experience. And by far and away, it's not to say that a white man does a bad job of creating a story, it's just that he creates a story. And our world, our society, has allowed white men a position of power that is a clear societal position that women have not been able to enjoy the benefits of as often as men have, that people of color have not been able to enjoy the benefits of as often as white men have. And so the story that we hear, the ideas that they bring to the table, the position of traditional journalists, is a different experience that a lot of people who are not enjoying that same position of privilege have understand or know. I think that's...
Rita, do you want to add
This
something?
is just to illustrate her point. Our newsroom comprises about 65 to 70% of our newsroom is young women. We have more young women, we have more women reporters at the Quint than we have men reporters. And this is virtually the first generation of strong women voices in journalism in India in a largely patriarchal, misogynist universe that these girls have grown up in. The consequence, of course, is that the editorial, the objectivity, but the facts are always there. There's been a molestation case in Bangalore, the facts will be there. So the journalistic rigor and honesty is there. But then the objectivity in the reporting is not entirely there. It is a little biased because it's women reporting. And for the first time in my 25 years of being in the media, I find that 45% of my readership is women. It's never been that in broadcast television. It was 10 to 15% on a good day.
Look, we're all a product of our own experience, and we bring our experiences to our jobs. There's no question. I think it also transcends race and gender. It extends to other things. I mean, I have talked recently about how many people in our newsroom here. America's been in so many wars over such a long period of time. How many people in our newsroom actually served in the military, have been at war, understand what so many Americans have gone through? Hardly anybody. We have, we've hired a couple recently, and they add a perspective that we really need in our newsroom. The same is true, as people look back on coverage of the campaign. It's like, how well did we understand the working class? How many people in our newsroom came from families that at any moment, if one parent lost a job, they had a family crisis. That they had no savings. They had lots of debt. They worried that they wouldn't get a job that was anywhere equivalent to what they had before. Most of the people who are in at least American newsrooms these days are coming from families that are of a professional class. And to what extent did we adequately understand what so much of America was going through? And I think that's really important. It does apply to women are going to bring a different perspective than I do. A person of color is going to bring a perspective that's different from my own. But people who have served in the military will bring a perspective. People who come from a working class background in middle America will bring a perspective that's different from the one that I bring. And I think that's important. That enriches our newsroom. It brings to us a lot of stories that I wouldn't even think of. I wouldn't even know about. And we absolutely need to have that in our newsrooms.
Right, we've had far too many questions from white middle-aged men, and there's a woman at the back, unless you were scratching your nose. No, all right, and then there's a woman over there.
Hi, I just wanted to counter that a bit and applaud Melissa for bringing it up, because I think that as a reader, when you read someone's take on an issue, and it doesn't resonate with your own experience as a person, then it makes you trust other things less as well. So when we're talking about this question of erosion of trust, if your personal experience doesn't align with what's being communicated to you by someone who's supposedly an authority, you begin to question all of the authorities. So I think it's a really important point, and I just wanted to add that. So there were other points that maybe I thought were maybe not
But it means
the
more
best.
diversity in the
but
newsroom is a really important part of rebuilding trust.
yeah, exactly.
That's a fantastic point, especially with
Point
a lot
nine,
of question.
point nine.
Point nine, and but there's a
we
question
made it.
over
We've got
there.
9 and 9.
We've got to 9.
Hi.
Let's see if we can get to 10.
I have
before the end of
a
the
question. I want to bring back to broadcast media and TV in general and your web videos that you guys are putting out. How do you assure that they don't become too gimmicky and the focus isn't only about trending? And I feel like often that has become the case now. And you've mentioned that you've added emojis and you're, putting voiceovers and various people. And this is something I struggle with because I am a financial reporter in Canada doing my MBA here now. But it's become very, very gimmicky. And I'm a part of that world, and I struggle with it all the time, and I don't want to be part of it, and I find it entertaining at the same time. But how are you trying to get that message out, making sure that the audience is really understanding that story as opposed to seeing, floating colors? And
Have you seen Vox videos?
Yes, I have. I've seen a
Okay.
lot. There's a Canadian too that I follow that
Okay, good.
works with you. Yes, yes.
So I think that like what we try to do is what we try to do with those videos is to be creative and innovative on each in a unique way for each video. So we try to take a very complicated subject and we try to add a bit of playfulness, a bit of wit, and then take it seriously when it needs to be taken seriously, but never take ourselves too seriously. So I think that if you can bridge into gimmicky when you are trying to be all gimmick and all flash, but if you actually approach it in a measured way, I think that they hit a very wonderful tone on a consistent basis of this balance between showing something in a fun, exploratory way, but also not taking it to the point where it's just like crazy flashing colors and moving GIFs. But you could potentially disagree with me.
Do you think that we're dumbing it down then?
No, I don't. That's a great thing. I mean, I think it's a good question. I don't think we are. I think that, again, I mentioned this. I think that people are ravenous for information. They want to see multiple entry points into stories. And so I think that what we've found is that you create a 2-minute video, and some people will want to see that 2-minute video. So other people will want to see, actually, to Marty's point, I think some people would want to listen to the entire interview because there's some people who actually are that interested in the subject matter that they want to hear the whole interview. Other people will want to see a 20-minute video. Other people will want to read. We do a thing often on Vox where we do 500 words that explain Brexit, and then we do 20,000 words that explain Brexit. And we see that audiences come to both at a pretty regular cadence because there's sometimes that you just need 500 words. You're moving fast, you don't have a ton of time, and then there's times that you go in depth. And so I think that I don't think we should be afraid of offering small solutions and quick hits. But I also think that we need to be providing length as well and depth as well.
If I could just add, now what digital gives you, you can do immersive multimedia pieces, right? Now, for instance, we did this gimmicky thing of putting a 360-degree camera. No, it was gimmicky. It was putting a 360-degree camera in Kashmir where stone pelting was happening. So we had stunning visuals of that, but that was gimmicky. You were exploiting that situation. But we put that video in the middle of a 1,200-word piece with very serious documentary stuff, also with a long interview with a separatist who wants independent Kashmir, which was almost a 25-minute interview, and we had a 1,200-word piece. That 360-degree camera, because currently VR is so attractive, we actually had huge time spent, which means people read most of the 1,200-worder, which frankly, most young people are not reading that much anymore. But they read it because it came with, there was, what I call skateboards, videos sort of slide in on all sides, and you've got all of that happening. But it worked.
We've got one, this may be the last question, so it better be a good one. No pressure.
So over the last few years, there's been a very apparent shift between government and media relations. So you have a president who is tweeting against the Washington Post and New York Times, or even in India, for example, where press conferences are something, we think back very nostalgically about. So in such a situation, what is the role of the media now? Is it just objective analysis and reporting and leaving it to the audience or the reader to make up their mind about the world that they live in? Or is it actually taking very hard stands and kind of trying to shape narratives, discourses, or even the morality in countries at present?
Can I answer that question?
Yeah, please.
Marty, but because people are seeing the situation in America now in such dramatic terms, and if you think this is 1933, you would approach your job in one way. If you thought this was 1914, it might be another way. But the question is really about this unprecedented situation in which the President of the United States is trying to delegitimize you and all your colleagues for purposes that we can only really guess at the moment. What's your response? I mean,
yeah. Yes, I do think he's endeavoring to go beyond just discrediting us. He's trying to delegitimize us, to marginalize us, and even to dehumanize us. If you actually look at the language that's been used, we've been called garbage, scum, the lowest form of humanity, and that wasn't enough, so he said the lowest form of life. I don't know what's left, but I think the idea is to position us as the opposition party, as they have called us as well, to position us as enemies, as they've also called us, and ultimately to position us as a non-credible source of information, which then means they are the credible source of information. They would be the only source of credible information, and other media outlets where they're not portraying in that way. And I think that's the objective. What is our role in that? Our role is I think it's a traditional role, and that is, obviously to go out and find the facts, to verify those facts, authenticate them, find out what they mean, ultimately, what the bigger significance is, and then to present that to the readers, and to do that no matter what the President of the United States is doing to us, no matter what he calls us, no matter how often he tries to discredit or marginalize us or delegitimize us, and to just keep doing our job, day in, day out, throughout the day, keep doing our job and not be deterred or dissuaded by what the President is doing. And we see that there is a large segment of the American population, and in fact the population of the world, that wants that from us. We've seen a surge of subscriptions, so has the New York Times, so have other outlets seen a surge in subscriptions. And that is a signal that people they say they want to support us. For the first time, people are saying, I can't just take you for granted anymore. I can't take the press for granted. And the press is the only institution these days that is going to do this kind of work, that's going to provide us the kind of information that we need and deserve to know. And so many of them are saying, it is time for me to put my hand in my pocket and to give you some of my money because I know you need this support. And I can't just be a freeloader any longer. And we have gotten incredible number of notes along those lines. Some of them I put up actually on my glass wall so that other people can see them. And it is really heartening. So we have to just keep at it. And ultimately, I think the most important obligation that we in the press have is to hold powerful individuals and powerful institutions accountable. That includes the government, the politicians, the policymakers, all of them. But it includes other institutions in our society as well. And I think that the public wants that of us. If we don't deliver that, they will never forgive us, and I don't think they should forgive us.
That is. Just over 10 years ago, there was a conversation in Oxford about whether to set up the Reuters Institute for the study of journalism, whether journalism was a thing that deserved to be studied. And Chris, you were a big part of that, as were others in this room. And I don't think you can listen to that without thinking that's why this was a good idea to set up the Reuters Institute. Journalism is worth studying. It's an imperfect thing. We've heard about the imperfections tonight as well as the ambitions for change, but I don't think anybody really seriously tonight believes that journalism is not something that is absolutely essential to a thriving democracy. We've had a wonderful lecture, Melissa. You needn't have been at all nervous. You're never nervous again because you give great lectures.
Thank you.
And, those of us who know India know that a thriving media outlet is essential in India, and it's fantastic that Ritu was here to talk about that work. We all love The Economist and the work that's been doing there. And Marty, in case you haven't got the message, you are one of the most important people. And I think we all ought to go and buy him a drink.
Hooray.